In the heart of Taguig City, where the streets were alive with the sounds of jeepneys and street vendors calling out their prices, Cemon Cowell sat alone near a rusty lamppost. His shirt was torn, his hands rough from years of hard labor, and his stomach had been empty for 2 days straight. The city lights flickered against the rain-soaked pavement, but none of that brightness reached his eyes. He had once believed in hard work and honesty, yet life had only rewarded him with hunger and humiliation. Every morning, he would wake up before sunrise, hoping to find a small job unloading vegetables at the wet market, but even those chances had begun to fade. Poverty clung to him like a shadow he could never escape. As he sat there, watching the cars rush past, Cemon's thoughts drifted to his small home on the edge of the city, a single-room shack built from wood scraps and rusted tin. Inside, his wife lay sick, her body frail from malnutrition, and his 2 young children slept beside her, their ribs showing through thin shirts. The memory tore at his heart. He had promised them a better life, but he could no longer even afford a cup of rice. That night, the sound of thunder rolled over the city, and he whispered to himself, "Maybe this world just forgot me." But then, from behind a parked jeepney, he overheard 2 men talking in hushed voices. They mentioned something about an unguarded bank truck that stopped daily at a small Metrobank branch in Makati, no security escort, just a driver and a teller. The words echoed in his mind like a spark in darkness. Cemon didn't want to listen, but desperation made him linger. The men laughed about how easy it would be to take the cash if someone had the guts to try. He turned away, but those words wouldn't leave him. As he walked home through the narrow alleyways, rain pouring down his face, he felt something shift inside him. He began to think of the robbery not as a crime, but as a chance to buy medicine, to feed his children, to stop the suffering that had become their daily life. For the first time, he considered what it meant to break the law for survival. He didn't want to be a thief, but what choice did he have when the world offered him none? That night, he couldn't sleep. The rain tapped against the roof like a haunting rhythm, and his wife's soft coughing reminded him of how little time she might have left. He looked at his children, their faces peaceful in sleep, and his heart broke again. In that silence, he made his decision. He didn't know how or when, but he would take that money. Not for greed, not for luxury, but because life had cornered him with no other way out. When dawn arrived, Cemon Cowell stood by the window, staring at the pale morning light creeping across the rooftops of Taguig. His eyes were hollow, his soul heavy, but for the first time in years, he felt something close to determination. The morning of the robbery arrived with the heavy scent of rain still clinging to the air. Cemon Cowell stood in the narrow hallway of his small home, staring at the cracked mirror nailed to the wall. His reflection looked nothing like the man he used to be, unshaven, eyes sunken, his face marked by exhaustion and fear. His trembling hands clutched an old revolver, rusted but still working, borrowed from a mechanic friend who didn't ask questions. As his wife coughed softly from the bed, he glanced at her and whispered, "I'll be back soon." She didn't know where he was going, and he didn't have the courage to tell her. Outside, the streets of Taguig were already alive, the sound of tricycles and vendors mixing with the early chaos of the city. Each step he took toward Makati felt like walking deeper into a nightmare he couldn't wake from. By the time he reached the Metrobank branch, his heart was beating like a drum inside his chest. The sun was hidden behind thick gray clouds, and a sense of dread hung in the air. The bank wasn't large, just a small, quiet branch on a corner street, where a few customers waited in line. Cemon stood outside for several minutes, pretending to read a newspaper, his eyes darting toward the door. He could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a mountain. Once he went inside, there would be no turning back. He whispered a prayer under his breath, asking for forgiveness, not for what he was about to do, but for what life had forced him into. Finally, he took a deep breath, tucked the gun inside his jacket, and pushed open the glass door. The soft chime above it sounded like a warning bell. Inside, the cool air hit him like a wave. He moved slowly toward the counter, his eyes fixed on the teller, a young woman counting bills, her hands steady and unaware of what was coming. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the revolver, and pointed it at her. The room froze. "Nobody move," he said, his voice shaking but loud enough to echo through the bank. The customers gasped. Someone dropped a wallet. His hands trembled so badly that the gun almost slipped from his grip. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he said again, his voice cracking. "Just the money. Please." Tears welled in his eyes as he watched the teller's terrified hands fill the bag with cash. Every second felt like an eternity. He didn't feel like a criminal, he felt like a man being swallowed by his own misery. The sound of police sirens in the distance shattered the fragile calm. Panic spread through the bank like wildfire. Cemon's heart raced as he grabbed the bag, his breath coming in short gasps. He backed away, whispering, "I'm sorry," before running out the door into the chaos of the city, where desperation and fate were waiting to collide. Cemon Cowell ran through the crowded streets of Cebu City, his heart pounding so violently it felt like it might burst through his chest. The sound of sirens screamed behind him, echoing off the walls of the narrow alleyways. His hands were shaking, gripping the bag of stolen money so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The people around him scattered in confusion, shouting as they realized what was happening. Sweat and rain mixed on his face, blurring his vision as he turned corner after corner, trying to disappear into the maze of the city. Every step felt heavier, every breath sharper. He could hear the shouts of the police growing closer, their boots slapping the wet pavement. The weight of what he had done pressed down on him with every heartbeat. For a brief moment, he looked at the bag and thought of his wife and children, how the money inside could have bought food, medicine, maybe even a new start. But deep down, he knew it was too late. He found himself on a broken bridge overlooking a dirty canal, the city lights shimmering faintly on the dark water below. The rain had turned into a drizzle, and the air was thick with the smell of gasoline and wet concrete. Standing there, chest heaving, Cemon realized he had nowhere left to run. The sound of approaching footsteps filled the air, officers shouting, guns drawn. He could have tried to fight, but what was the point? He was just a poor man, trapped in a world that never gave him a chance. His eyes filled with tears as he looked down at the bag in his hands. The money seemed to mock him now, glowing faintly beneath the streetlight. It wasn't salvation anymore, it was a curse. With trembling hands, he threw the bag into the river. The splash echoed like a final goodbye. "I only wanted to save them," he whispered, voice breaking under the weight of his guilt. The police surrounded him, weapons raised, but Cemon didn't move. He slowly raised his empty hands in surrender, his eyes distant and hollow. In that moment, he looked less like a criminal and more like a broken soul who had finally lost everything. The officers dragged him to the ground, handcuffing him as the rain began to fall harder once more. Bystanders gathered nearby, watching in silence as the man who had robbed a bank was taken away. Some felt pity, others fear, but none could forget the image of Cemon Cowell, a desperate father who had crossed a line not out of greed, but out of hopelessness. His story spread through the city like wildfire, turning him into a symbol of how poverty could twist even the kindest heart into despair. Long after that night, people in Cebu would still whisper his name, not as a warning, but as a reminder of how society often creates its own criminals.